I swear to God, she was standing right in the middle of the road. Pale face, eyes black as oil. She was standing in the middle of the highway. No shoes, no headlights, just a woman in white staring. I slammed on the brakes, and she didn't move. When I climbed out, there were no footprints. But there was a handprint, a smeared wet handprint, on my windshield. 3 nights later, she was on the side mirror looking at me. Tonight, 3 truckers share what they thought would be another lonely run, and what chased them down in the night. Turn the lights off, put your headphones on, and listen closely. These are true stories from the road. I've been behind a wheel for longer than I care to add up. Truck stops under neon suns, a thermos of coffee gone cold, a CB radio that sings to you when the night won't. You learn rhythms out here. The sleeping breaths of rest areas, the glow of sodium lamps in small towns, the way the horizon eats the sun at dusk. You learn to trust a road. And sometimes, if you're old enough, to fear the places where the road forgets how to be ordinary. This was one of those nights. December, dead of winter. I was between Albuquerque and Flagstaff. Route 66 stretched out like a black ribbon under my tires. The sky was a blank smear. No moon to keep me company, no stars, just a ceiling of impossible dark. I've been driving for hours. Caffeine working for a while, then losing its grip. The cab light off, the dash casting the only small squares of amber glow. Sleep was a constant temptation. About 2 a.m., I saw her, or the shape of her, at the edge of the road. At first I thought animal, because in the desert things sometimes look alive when they are not. I slowed down, my foot light and careful on the pedal. The figure stayed just beyond the shoulder. A woman in a white dress, pale in the way things look pale in headlights at night. Bare feet, hair like a wet shadow around her face. Instinct was to help. I rolled the window down and called, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need a ride?" The wind took the words half a second before they could reach me. She turned, slow, like someone moving underwater. Her eyes caught the light and didn't reflect back like living eyes. They were dull, dark like oil slicks. She didn't speak loud. She whispered, but the words sliced the coal like a knife. "Don't go past the bridge." I remember laughing a little at the absurdity. The cold, the lonely mind making a story. And then I blinked and she was gone. One heartbeat I saw a dress. The next the shoulder was empty. There were no prints, no tracks in the dust, no disturbed weeds. Nothing. My chest tightened. I told myself to get back in the truck and move on. But I got curious, and curiosity's a poor companion when the world is thin and strange. 10 minutes down the road, the headlights caught the dark, metal crumpled. A car turned half over the guardrail. Smoke like pale breath. A single set of hazards blinking. The smell of burned rubber. If I had been doing 70 instead of 50, I would have been in the wreckage. I called it in. Sheriff showed up with a cruiser that seemed too small for the scale of a highway. He was a quiet man, the kind whose face has been thawed out by years of routine and late-night coffee. When I told him about the woman in white, he didn't roll his eyes. He rubbed his chin and told me a story about a girl who died on that bridge in the late 70s. They'd found a car smashed up and her body frozen in the passenger seat. Locals called her the Warning or the Watcher because she showed up before bad accidents. He told me not to leave the area alone at night if I could help it. He said something else I'll never forget. Sometimes she saves you. Sometimes she brings what follows. His voice had the soft weight of someone who could not explain why the world bent the way it did. I went back to my truck with that story lodged in my mouth like a stone. My hand shook while I rewound the dashcam footage. For the most part, it was the blur of night, the wash of headlights. Then the footage hiccuped, static where the frame should have been. And when it came back, there was a split-second image I couldn't explain. A face pressed forward, palm splayed against the glass on the other side. Eyes like wells. Her mouth looked like it was opening, but no air, nothing but this frozen thing. I left Route 66 the next day, and I haven't gone back. Sometimes when I'm alone at a rest stop, I'll catch myself staring at the windows, waiting for that flash of pale dress. Though I don't want it to be true. At night when the road is empty and my mind is raw, I'll think of the handprint, wet, smeared, and I wonder if she was trying to stop me, or she was trying to warn me of something even worse that rides behind the headlights. I didn't sleep the night after that. Every time I closed my eyes, the desert black reassembled itself. The road unspooling like a ribbon, the bridge like an exclamation point in the dark, the woman in white standing like a punctuation that refused to be understood. I stayed in the truck, coffee in a styrofoam cup going cold beside me, the heater coughing warm breath into the cab. Road stories usually fit neatly into one of two boxes, hallucination or coincidence. And for a practical man, those are comforting boxes. But some things don't fit. The next week, I found excuses to be back on the route. Call it stubbornness or a hope to see proof of the mundane. I told myself I'd face whatever had happened, get answers, be the rational guy. Only at dusk, at the diner in the town just beyond the bridge, an old woman with a scarf around her neck tapped the table and said, "You saw her, didn't you?" She told me things nobody sells ticketed as legend, details that tasted of truth. She'd been a child when the crash happened. She said the girl had been running from somewhere, that a heater in a car had stuck, or maybe it was fear. The old woman didn't know. She didn't know the road left shadows that didn't want to be noticed. Then the strange little things started. Small things that shouldn't be there. A strand of long hair on the passenger seat that I knew wasn't mine. Fine dark, oily like the night. A single damp handprint on the inside of the window, where a child might press if they were tired of being in the dark. Once, on a clear night months later, my rear view caught a flash, a pale face reflected for a single frame and gone. Friends laughed at me, said stress makes a man see ghosts. But I'll tell you this, I haven't been that foolish since. I avoid that bridge. I avoid that shoulder. And sometimes when the sky is a colorless wash, I drive a different road just to keep from learning what else might be watching from the dark. I was younger then, in a way that made me braver and stupider. That night the rain came down like someone was emptying buckets from a roof. The kind of storm that makes the world look like water on glass. I was 3 hours out of Bowling Green, tired, wanted to reach a well-deserved nap at a truck stop. My entire body ached in the honest, slow way it does from long miles. On the shoulder, I saw a man, bent like a question mark, waving a hand to the passing cars. His clothes were soaked. He had no bag, no phone, nothing but the drenched fabric clinging to his clothes. When I pulled over, he climbed in with the urgency of someone who had been standing in the rain for a long time. He didn't thank me. He didn't smile. He sat and stared straight ahead, like a man carved from wood. The smell of him was the scent of wet earth, mud under his fingernails. He answered questions in single words. He told me he needed to get to Hollow Creek, a tiny road that went to a small, almost forgotten cemetery. His voice had a slow scrape to it, like a blade rubbed over stone. "Have you ever done something you regret?" he asked suddenly without preamble. It wasn't a small talk question. It was a lever pulled on my sternum, heavy and immediate. I tightened my grip on the wheel and said what any tired man says, "Who hasn't?" We drove in silence, rain tapping its nail rhythm on the roof. He kept glancing at me from the corner of his eyes. Once, when lightning lit the highway, I saw cuts on his hands, raw and red. I told myself maybe he'd been in a fight, or maybe he'd been working in the mud. We're quick to settle on mundane answers when the night presses down. When I turned off onto Hollow Creek Road, the driver said nothing. When I slowed to pull into the gravel lot by the cemetery, ready to tell him I'd wait to make sure he was okay, I turned, and he wasn't there. No shuffle, no door slam, just an empty seat and a puddle where he'd been sitting. The jacket he'd worn was gone. It should have taken sound to leave, but there was nothing but rain. On the dash was a photograph. I don't know how it got there. The photo was old, the corners fuzzy from water. A woman with a child on her lap, both smiling like they believed in forever. On the back in a slow blue ink. Gone too soon. 1997. Something cold crawled up my neck. I drove straight to the only place in town that had actual memory, the diner. I showed the picture to the woman behind the counter. Her hands froze. Her eyes filled with sudden hard light. "That's the McCains," she said. "They never recovered the husband. Storm took him," they said, "or he left. They begged around here to find him. The kid and the wife, buried right there, Hollow Creek. People say he comes back sometimes." The following morning, I went out with shovel because I'm a practical man, and because I hoped for a rational explanation. At the grave, the photograph lay half buried in last night's mud, as if someone had placed it there and the rain had tried to hide it. And standing above the fresh earth, scuffed into grass, were shallow prints. Too many belonged to just a man. Like someone had been walking around the grave in circles, counting, waiting. After Hollow Creek, I developed a peculiar list of little rules. I never pick someone up alone at night anymore. I always check the back seat twice. I started recording every odd thing, filing away like evidence against my own sense of reason. But the man in the rain kept pushing at the edges of my days. I found myself driving the stretch late and thinking about the photograph on the dash. The woman with child whose faces had been sunlit in happier years and then crushed by whatever the world did. A month later, I went back to the cemetery in daylight. Because the dark does strange things to memory, and I wanted to test my fear against the factual. Hollow Creek was smaller than my mind had made it. A neat row of modest stones and a gate that creaked if you touched it. I sat on the tailgate of my rig for a long time and watched the grasses move in a wind that smelled faintly of oil and old coffee. An old groundskeeper with palms like cracked leather came up and told me about the case. The husband who vanished. A search that went cold. Rumors that he couldn't face what he'd done. He paused, then said, "Sometimes folks hear a voice on the shoulder calling them back." That night, I dreamt a small hand rubbing across glass, reaching, and in the dream my own hands were the ones pressed to the other side. I woke with my palms sticky with sweat and the taste of iron in my mouth. Over the next few weeks, radios in my cab would stir awake with voices at odd hours. A child's laugh tunneled low, a man's whisper asking for directions to a place that didn't exist on the map. When I checked the cab, I found damp soil tracked into the locker, and once, a pebble in the seam of the seat that hadn't been there before. On a quiet night not long after, I slept at a truck stop and woke to the sound of a kid calling my name like someone mimicked a memory. I opened the door and saw small prints on the asphalt, leading toward the dark tree line. They stopped at the edge of the light, like someone who had been asked to wait and couldn't decide whether to come back. I left without breakfast. I don't know what the man wanted. I don't know if he was asking for forgiveness or asking me to witness his return. What I do know is this. Some roads keep pieces of the people who passed them, and sometimes those pieces learn to ask the living questions that have no good answers. CB radios are a lifeline. You learn the code. Breaker, what's your 20? 10-4. In the day, it's a clutter of helpful voices. At night, it becomes a sound of other hearts beating through the dark. I always kept mine on low on Channel 19, because that's where drivers talk about the road. But ears that listen too long hear voices that don't belong. It was a monsoon week in late summer, miles from any town, Highway 90 skimming the edge of nowhere. My load was heavy and my patience thin. Around 3 a.m, the radio spat out static, and then a voice saw off a secret. "He's coming. Don't stop." I thought it was some prank. People play with CBs, that's a fact. I hit the mic, called Breaker, Breaker, but the static was thick like cotton in the speaker. Then, through the hiss, a whisper that sounded like it was right next to my ear. "If you see the lights, don't look at them." And then I saw them. Lights like lanterns on the water, floating too high to be motorcycles and too low to be aircraft. Two orbs bobbing and weaving in a way that suggested not light, but intent. They glided over the highway, then behind me, then beside the trailer. When the lights came close to the cab, I felt the hairs on my arms lift as if they were hearing a sound beneath the sound. My engine hiccuped. The RPMs dipped. The rig stuttered and died like a slow machine taking its last breath. The radio fell into silence. For 3 minutes, exactly 3, nothing moved but the hands on my wheel. The lights drifted around me, and if I look back now, it felt like they were reading the truck, checking the seams, the bolts, the places things might hide. I couldn't see a vehicle, just the lights, and sometimes a suggestion of a shape behind them like a shadow with arms. When the engine came back, it felt like surfacing from some deep cold water. I started the truck and accelerated until my knuckles hurt. I didn't stop until sun made the world possible again. At a greasy spoon just off the interstate, I told a man whose face looked like leather and who had the kind of voice that had been split through 1,000 miles. He listened without blinking, then lifted his coffee cup and set it down. "Channel 19's a doorway," he said. "You hear somebody on it like that, they're not just talking, they're warning, or they're bait. Some nights the lights follow you for days." The CB story spread like someone whispering behind a closed door. Old-timers told me about other nights when the radio took on a life of its own, voices that weren't human, or the faint echo of a caller whose words seemed to warp the air. Once, a driver told me, his rig had lights appear in the sky that seemed to tattoo themselves into clouds. Another man swore a light hovered over his trailer for hours until the sun made it invisible. There's a pattern in these confessions. A small escalation, first a whisper, then a light, then a presence that the truck chases like an animal chases a scent. After my own run-in, I started keeping a little notebook with times and channel numbers. I recorded the nights, the weather, the cadence of the breathing on the line. The more I listened, the less what I heard fit into usual categories. Some nights it was a woman's breath and the smell of ozone. Some nights it was a child's counting. Other nights, the worst, it was a name. Once, clear as daylight on a night without moon, the voice said my full name into static. It didn't sound like a trick of the equipment. It sounded like someone who had been waiting in the dark and had finally found the right channel to speak through. Months later, while cleaning the cab between loads, I found something carved very faintly into the metal of the dashboard. Not deep, nothing to stop a truck with, but enough if you stood under the right light to make out 3 letters repeated in a neat row. I don't know why I read them aloud, but I did, and the sound of my own voice felt like a trespass. Sometimes when I'm on the road and the radio is quiet, I leave the CB on just enough to monitor. There are nights when the static comes and the hair on my arms lifts, and if I squint into the dark, I can pretend the lights I saw were nothing more than distant town lamps. But I can't pretend that the handprint on my windshield didn't exist. I can't pretend that a face didn't press against the other side. Those things are small. They are small and simple, and they compound. Like a scratch on a window you never quite buff away, they become grooves for other, stranger things to sit in. Which one chilled you the most? The girl on Route 66, the hitchhiker in the rain, or the voice on Channel 19? Would you have stopped? Have you ever driven alone and seen something that didn't belong? Share below. I read the best comments in the next video. Remember, the road keeps more than just miles. It carries memories, warnings, and sometimes things that never learn to go away.